faint scent of her perfume, usually a comfort, now clung to the air like a shroud, heavy with a secret I hadn't yet named. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of mundane twilight that usually dissolved into the familiar rhythm of dinner, a shared show, and the quiet hum of our life together. I, Damian Cole, 32, Senior Operations Manager at Harrington Logistics, had just walked through the door of our meticulously kept suburban home, the weight of a long day's spreadsheet still pressing on my shoulders. Lena, my wife of 5 years, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she chopped vegetables for a stir-fry. Everything seemed perfectly normal, a tableau of domestic bliss. Then I saw it. Her phone, usually glued to her side, lay abandoned on the polished granite counter, screen up. A notification flashed, a name I recognized instantly, a name that made my blood run cold. Finch Denton. Not a work email, not a casual text from a colleague, but something more intimate, a snippet of a message preview that burned itself into my retina before I could even consciously process it. Can't wait for tomorrow night. Same place? A cold wave washed over me, not of anger, not yet, but of a profound, unsettling stillness. My breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary gasp, but I forced it steady. My hand, reaching instinctively for the device, froze midair. I didn't touch the phone, didn't unlock it. The urge to rip it from the counter, to demand answers, to shatter the fragile peace of our home was a primal scream trapped behind my teeth. But something deeper, colder took hold, a survival instinct. I placed my briefcase down with a deliberate, almost unnervingly steady hand, my gaze fixed on the innocuous device. My mind, usually a whirlwind of logistics and deadlines, became a silent, calculating machine. "Damian, you're home early," Lena called out, her voice light, innocent. Too innocent? I couldn't tell. My perception had already fractured. I forced a smile, a practiced mask I hadn't known I possessed. "Meeting wrapped up quicker than expected. Smells good." The words felt alien on my tongue, coated in a sudden bitter ash. I moved past the counter, careful not to glance at the phone again, as if acknowledging its presence would confirm the nascent horror blooming in my chest. That night, sleep was a cruel mirage. I lay beside Lena, her breathing soft and even, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within me. Every shared memory, every whispered promise, every intimate touch now felt tainted, replayed through a filter of suspicion. Finch Denton, my boss, my mentor, the man who had championed my rise at Harrington Logistics, who had celebrated our wedding with a generous gift and a hearty toast. The irony was a physical ache. He was a titan in the industry, a man I respected, a man I had, foolishly, trusted. And Lena, my anchor, my confidant, the woman I had built my entire future around. The next morning, the world seemed sharper, colors more vivid, sounds more acute. Every glance Lena cast my way, every casual touch, was scrutinized, analyzed. Was there a flicker of guilt in her eyes? A nervous tremor in her laugh? I saw nothing. Only the familiar, loving wife I thought I knew. It was a terrifying realization. She was either a master of deception or I was losing my mind. I chose to believe the former. It was easier than confronting the latter. At the office, the air was thick with a new kind of tension. Finch Denton, usually a whirlwind of energy, seemed different. A subtle shift in his posture, a knowing glint in his eye when he spoke to me, a casualness that now felt predatory. I watched him, a silent observer in my own unfolding tragedy. He was charismatic, powerful, a man who commanded attention. I'd always admired that. Now I saw it as a weapon. I spent the day in a fog of forced productivity, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my mind miles away, replaying the text message, searching for context, for an explanation, for anything that would make sense of the chaos. I remembered Lena's late nights, her vague excuses about girls' nights or extra work. I remembered Finch's sudden interest in a project Lena was leading, an interest that had seemed professional at the time, but now felt insidious. The pieces, once scattered and innocuous, were beginning to click into place, forming a mosaic of betrayal. The vulnerability of the initial shock slowly receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Confrontation was emotional, messy, and I needed clarity. I needed proof. I needed a plan. My mind, trained in the intricate dance of supply chains and logistical efficiency, began to apply the same principles to my personal life. Data collection, analysis, strategy. That evening, Lena announced she was going out with her friend, Sarah. "Just a quick dinner, honey, don't wait up." Her voice was light, her kiss brief. I watched her leave, a knot tightening in my stomach. Was it Sarah? Or was it tomorrow night, same place? I knew the answer, or at least I felt it in my bones. I didn't follow her. That wasn't my style. Instead, I sat in the quiet house, the silence amplifying the frantic whispers of my thoughts. I opened my laptop, not for work, but for something else entirely. I started with the basics: public records, social media, anything that could give me a clearer picture of Finch Denton's life outside the office. Then I moved to Lena's digital footprint, searching for anomalies, for anything that deviated from the narrative she presented. It was painstaking, humiliating work, but I was driven by a force stronger than shame: the desperate need to understand the full scope of the deception. Hours later, the screen glowed with a pattern of overlapping schedules, a series of late nights for Lena coinciding with business dinners for Finch. The locations, cross-referenced with Lena's credit card statements, painted a damning picture: a quiet, upscale restaurant downtown, a boutique hotel known for its discretion. The evidence wasn't a smoking gun, not yet, but it was a meticulously assembled arsenal of suspicion. My heart hammered, but my hands remained steady. The anger was no longer a burning rage, but a chilling frost. I was no longer just a betrayed husband. I was an analyst, a strategist, meticulously charting the coordinates of my own destruction. I closed the laptop, the click echoing in the silent room. The game had changed, and I had just decided to play. If you've ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, felt the icy grip of betrayal, then you understand the silence that follows. There are more stories like this, raw and unfiltered, waiting to be told. Join me and let's walk together through these shadows. The click of the laptop closing was the only sound in the house, a definitive period at the end of a sentence I hadn't wanted to read. Lena returned hours later, her steps light, her voice a cheerful murmur as she recounted a fabricated evening with Sarah. I listened, my face a carefully constructed mask of mild interest, offering the appropriate nods and brief questions. Every word she spoke, every innocent gesture was now filtered through a lens of suspicion, each detail scrutinized for the telltale tremor of deceit. I saw nothing. Or rather, I saw everything, but she revealed nothing. This was the first layer of the game, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. The next morning the sun rose with an almost mocking brilliance. I went through the motions of our shared routine: coffee, a quick breakfast, the perfunctory kiss goodbye. My touch was as gentle as ever, my gaze seemingly warm, but inside, a glacial current flowed. I observed her, the way her eyes darted slightly when I asked about her evening, the almost imperceptible hesitation before she answered a simple question. These weren't overt lies, but subtle dissonances in the symphony of our life together, notes that only a finely tuned ear or a deeply wounded heart could detect. At Harrington Logistics, the corporate hum felt louder, more oppressive. Finch Denton in his corner office was a constant looming presence. I found myself observing him with the same detached intensity I applied to Lena. His usual boisterous confidence seemed to have an added layer of smugness, a subtle swagger that hadn't been there before. He'd catch my eye across the open-plan office, offer a quick, almost conspiratorial smile, and I'd return it, a hollow echo of my former self. The irony was a bitter taste. He was promoting Lena, praising her work, all while undermining the very foundation of my life. My anger, initially a searing inferno, had begun to cool, solidifying into something far more dangerous: strategy. The emotional turmoil was still a constant undercurrent, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was no longer allowed to dictate my actions. I understood that raw emotion would only lead to a messy public implosion, one that would likely cost me my career, my dignity, and potentially even my financial stability. No, this required precision. This required control. I wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. I was seeking a rebalancing of the scales, a meticulous dismantling of their carefully constructed deception. My first intelligent action was subtle, almost imperceptible. I started arriving at the office earlier, long before anyone else, including Finch. I used this time, not for my usual work, but to discreetly access company servers, specifically looking at project allocations and communication logs related to Lena's recent successes. Finch had been her primary sponsor, pushing her for promotions, giving her high-profile assignments. I needed to understand the full extent of their professional entanglement, to see if their personal betrayal had bled into corporate malpractice. It was a risk, a violation of company policy, but the stakes were too high to play by the rules they had already broken. I also began to subtly shift my own workload. I volunteered for projects that required cross-departmental collaboration, particularly those that intersected with Lena's team. This gave me legitimate reasons to be in her orbit, to observe her interactions with Finch in a professional setting, to gauge the unspoken language between them. I noticed the way her eyes would linger on him a fraction of a second too long, the way his hand would brush her arm with an almost imperceptible familiarity during a meeting. These were not smoking guns, but they were consistent, reinforcing the narrative my laptop had already begun to paint. At home, I installed a small, discreet camera in the living room, disguised as a smart home device. It was a violation of trust, a line I never thought I'd cross, but the trust had already been shattered. I needed undeniable proof, something beyond a text message preview and circumstantial evidence. I needed to see, to hear, to know. The footage, when I reviewed it late at night, was mostly mundane. Lena watching TV, reading, talking on the phone. But I was looking for patterns, for absences, for anything that deviated from her stated activities. My financial review continued in parallel. I meticulously cataloged our joint assets, reviewed bank statements, and even discreetly consulted a lawyer, framing my questions hypothetically, exploring the legal landscape of divorce without revealing my personal situation. I was building a fortress of information, preparing for a war I hoped to win with minimal collateral damage to myself. One evening, Lena mentioned a new project she was leading, a high-stakes deal with a major client that Finch had personally assigned to her. "He really trusts me with this one, Damian," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "It could be huge for my career." I smiled, congratulated her, and felt a cold knot of resolve tighten in my stomach. This was it. This was the leverage. The next day I found myself in Finch's office, ostensibly to discuss a different matter. As we talked, I subtly steered the conversation towards Lena's new project. Finch, beaming, praised her profusely. "Lena's a star, Damian, a real asset. I'm even thinking of recommending her for the VP of Operations role when it opens up next quarter. She's earned it." My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my expression remained neutral, even appreciative. "That's fantastic, Finch. She's worked incredibly hard." I paused, letting the silence hang, then added, "You know, I was just thinking about the security protocols for that new client. Given the sensitive nature of their data, we should probably run a full background check on everyone involved, especially those in key leadership roles in the project. Just a standard precaution, of course, but it would cover us from any potential liabilities down the line." Finch's smile faltered, just for a flicker. His eyes, usually so direct, darted away for a split second before returning to mine, a forced joviality back in place. "A background check? For Lena? Damian, that's a bit extreme, don't you think? She's been with us for years." "Just a thought," I said, shrugging casually. "Best practices, you know, especially with a client of this magnitude. We wouldn't want any unforeseen complications, would we?" I held his gaze, a silent challenge passing between us. He knew what I was implying, even if the words were innocuous. He knew the skeletons in his own closet, and now he knew I was aware of them too. The air in the room thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding. I had just moved my first piece on the board, and the game had irrevocably changed. The air in Finch Denton's office had grown perceptibly colder after my suggestion of a background check. The flicker of discomfort in his eyes was a victory, small but significant. It confirmed my suspicion. He had something to hide, and he knew I was aware of it, even if he couldn't pinpoint how. My plan, still nascent, began to crystallize with a chilling clarity. This wasn't about vengeance in the traditional sense. It was about surgical extraction, a precise dismantling of a betrayal that had infected every corner of my life. The execution began subtly, a series of calculated maneuvers within the corporate labyrinth of Harrington Logistics. I didn't push the background check directly. Instead, I leveraged my position as a senior operations manager to initiate a routine compliance audit for all high-value projects, citing recent industry-wide security breaches as justification. It was a standard corporate boilerplate, easily approved by the compliance department, and it conveniently encompassed Lena's new client deal. The audit would involve a review of all key personnel, their financial disclosures, and a comprehensive background check. It was impersonal, undeniable, and entirely within protocol. Finch, predictably, tried to intervene. He called me into his office a few days later, his usual affable demeanor strained. "Damian, about this compliance audit, it seems a bit heavy-handed for Lena's project. She's a trusted employee. It could slow things down, send the wrong message to the client." I met his gaze, my expression neutral, almost apologetic. "I understand your concern, Finch, but as you know, compliance is non-negotiable, especially with a client of this magnitude. My team identified a potential vulnerability in our current process, and this audit is the most efficient way to mitigate risk. It's about protecting the company, and by extension, protecting Lena and her project from any future scrutiny." My words were precise, corporate jargon weaponized. I had anticipated his pushback and had my counter-arguments ready, each one laced with an unassailable logic that left no room for emotional appeal. He was trapped by his own corporate rhetoric. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. "Very well, Damian. Just ensure it's handled discreetly. We don't want to cause any unnecessary alarm." He was trying to control the narrative, to minimize the damage, but the subtle shift in his tone, the forced casualness, told me he was rattled. He knew the audit was a Trojan horse, but he couldn't openly object without raising further suspicion. Lena, meanwhile, was oblivious, or so it seemed. At home, she was increasingly preoccupied with her new project, often working late, her phone a constant companion. The small camera I had installed in the living room became my silent witness. It captured mundane moments, but also confirmed her late night departures, her hushed phone calls, and the almost imperceptible tension that now clung to her whenever Finch's name came up in conversation. I cross-referenced these with Finch's travel schedule, his expense reports, and even the discreet inquiries I made through a former colleague in HR about his business trips. The patterns were undeniable, forming a meticulous timeline of their deception. My rage had fully transmuted into a cold, analytical precision. I was no longer the vulnerable husband. I was an architect of consequence. I began to subtly manipulate the corporate environment around them. During team meetings, I would ask pointed, yet seemingly innocuous, questions about project timelines, resource allocation, and accountability, always ensuring Lena and Finch were in the spotlight. I praised Lena's work publicly, amplifying her successes, knowing that the higher she climbed, the harder her fall would be. This wasn't just about exposing an affair, it was about exposing a systemic abuse of power and trust, both personal and professional. I also started cultivating relationships with key figures in HR and compliance, framing my conversations as proactive discussions about corporate governance and ethical leadership. I spoke in hypotheticals, discussing the potential damage of conflicts of interest, the importance of transparency, and the severe repercussions for those who violated company policy. I was planting seeds, preparing the ground for the inevitable harvest. One afternoon, I received an anonymous email. It was a single, grainy photograph taken from a distance. Lena and Finch laughing intimately over drinks at a dimly lit bar, far from any business meeting location. The timestamp was recent. It wasn't the smoking gun I needed for HR, but it was a potent piece of emotional ammunition, confirming what I already knew, adding another layer of ice to my resolve. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching. This wasn't just my secret anymore. The compliance audit progressed. I ensured that the team assigned to Lena's project was thorough, meticulous, and entirely unaware of my personal motivations. They were simply following protocol, ticking boxes, uncovering facts. The preliminary reports began to trickle in, highlighting minor discrepancies in expense reports, unusual travel patterns, and a curious lack of formal documentation for some of Finch's mentoring sessions with Lena. Individually, they were negligible. Collectively, they painted a picture of impropriety. I compiled everything: the camera footage, the financial records, the communication logs, the audit reports, and the anonymous photograph. I organized it into a meticulously detailed dossier, each piece of evidence cross-referenced, each timeline meticulously constructed. It was a narrative of betrayal, laid bare with corporate precision. The final piece of my plan involved a strategic leak, not to the entire company, not yet, but to a specific individual, Sarah, Lena's supposed friend, the one she used as an alibi. Sarah was also a mid-level manager at Harrington Logistics, and I knew she had a keen sense of justice and a strong dislike for corporate favoritism. I crafted an anonymous email containing just enough verifiable information to pique her curiosity, to make her start looking, to make her connect the dots. I didn't accuse, I merely presented facts, allowing her to draw her own conclusions. The seed of doubt was planted. The following Monday, an email landed in my inbox. It was from HR, a formal invitation for a confidential meeting regarding the ongoing compliance audit. The subject line was innocuous, but the sender was the head of HR, a woman known for her unwavering integrity. The trap was set. The pieces were in motion. I had moved the board, and now the game was about to enter its final, brutal phase. The next day, the entire company would know. The silence before the storm was deafening. What do you think will happen in that HR meeting? Share your predictions in the comments below. The HR meeting room was sterile, a neutral battleground of beige walls and polished mahogany. Across the table sat Ms. Evelyn Reed, the head of Human Resources, her expression unreadable, and Mr. Thomas Vance, a corporate lawyer from the firm's external counsel, whose gaze was sharp, dissecting. I, Damian Cole, sat opposite them, my briefcase resting on my lap, its contents a meticulously assembled arsenal. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a prelude to the storm I had so carefully orchestrated. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Cole," Ms. Reed began, her voice calm, professional. "As you know, we've been conducting a comprehensive compliance audit across several high-value projects. Your insights have been invaluable." I nodded, maintaining a composed silence. My role here was not to accuse, but to witness the inevitable unfolding of facts. The groundwork had been laid, the seeds planted, and now the harvest was due. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Lena walked in, her face a mask of polite confusion, followed by Finch Denton, who entered with his usual bluster, a forced smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. He saw me, and for a fleeting moment his smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of recognition, perhaps even fear. Lena, catching my eye, offered a small, uncertain smile. She still didn't know. Ms. Reed wasted no time. "Thank you both for joining us." This is a confidential meeting to discuss some findings from our recent compliance audit, specifically concerning the Project Phoenix initiative. Her tone was even, devoid of emotion, but the gravity of her words hung heavy in the air. Mr. Vance then took over, his voice a low, measured drone as he began to present the evidence. He spoke of unusual travel patterns, discrepancies in expense reports, unauthorized use of company resources, and a clear pattern of a conflict of interest. He didn't mention names initially, but the context was undeniable. He displayed a series of meticulously compiled documents, expense reports showing Finch and Lena in the same city on separate business trips, hotel bills with overlapping dates, communication logs highlighting an excessive number of private calls and messages during work hours. Lena's face, initially confused, slowly drained of color. Her eyes darted between Finch and me, a dawning horror replacing her earlier uncertainty. Finch, on the other hand, tried to interrupt, to deflect, to charm his way out. "Evelyn, Thomas, this is ridiculous. These are all perfectly legitimate business engagements. Lena and I have been working very closely on Project Phoenix. It's a demanding initiative." "Indeed, Mr. Denton," Mr. Vance interjected, his voice unwavering, "which brings us to the more personal aspects of our findings." He then displayed the anonymous photograph I had received, projected onto the screen. It was the grainy image of Finch and Lena, laughing intimately at the bar. The date and time were clearly visible. The air left Lena's lungs in a sharp gasp. She stared at the image, then at Finch, her betrayal now laid bare for all to see. Her eyes, wide with panic, finally landed on me, and in them I saw a desperate plea, a dawning understanding of the trap she had walked into, but my face remained impassive, a cold mirror reflecting her own fear. Finch, seeing the game was up, shifted tactics. He tried to minimize, to rationalize. "This is a gross misinterpretation. A casual drink after a long day. There's nothing untoward here." "Mr. Denton," Ms. Reed cut in, her voice now edged with steel, "our investigation, corroborated by multiple sources, indicates a pattern of behavior that constitutes a severe breach of our company's code of conduct, ethical guidelines, and anti-fraternization policies. Furthermore, the promotion of Ms. Cole to a position of significant authority on a project directly overseen by you while engaged in an undisclosed personal relationship constitutes a clear conflict of interest and an abuse of your executive power." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Finch's face contorted, a mixture of rage and defeat. He looked at me, a silent accusation in his eyes, as if I had personally orchestrated his downfall. And in a way, I had. But I offered no reaction, no smirk, no triumphant gaze. Just a calm, unwavering presence. The meeting continued for what felt like an eternity. Lena, now openly weeping, tried to defend herself, to explain, but her words were hollow, drowned out by the weight of the evidence. Finch, defeated, eventually fell silent, his usual bravado crumbling under the relentless assault of facts. By the end, the verdict was clear. Finch Denton was terminated immediately for gross misconduct and abuse of power. Lena Cole was offered the option to resign immediately or face termination with cause, which would severely impact her future career prospects. She chose to resign, her signature a shaky scrawl on the document. I watched it all unfold, a silent observer at the execution of my own carefully constructed justice. There was no surge of triumph, no wild elation, only a profound, almost chilling sense of completion. The emotional catharsis wasn't a burst of fire, but a slow, steady release of a burden I had carried for too long. The vulnerability had been replaced by control, the anger by resolution. I had not sought revenge. I had sought equilibrium. And now it was achieved. In the weeks that followed, the corporate rumor mill churned, but I remained detached. I filed for divorce, a process that was surprisingly swift and uncontested. Lena, stripped of her corporate ambition and her illicit affair, seemed to have lost her fight. She moved out of our home, taking only what was hers, leaving behind the ghost of a life we had once shared. I sold the house, a symbolic severing of ties, and moved into a minimalist apartment downtown, a space unburdened by memories. My career at Harrington Logistics continued, but with a subtle shift. I was no longer just a manager. I was the man who had quietly, meticulously brought down a powerful executive. My colleagues looked at me differently, with a mixture of respect and a healthy dose of caution. I had proven myself to be a man of quiet strength, capable of navigating the treacherous currents of corporate politics and personal betrayal with an unnerving calm. I often found myself staring out of my new apartment window, high above the city, watching the endless flow of traffic, the distant lights. The world continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding within its concrete canyons. I was a part of it, yet separate, observing. The pain of betrayal had receded, replaced by a quiet understanding of human nature, its capacity for both profound love and devastating deceit. I had learned to play the game, not with emotion, but with intellect, with strategy, with an unyielding resolve. The scars remained etched deep within, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of a lesson learned, a transformation undergone. I was no longer the man who had walked into his home that Tuesday evening, oblivious to the secret that would shatter his world. I was someone new, forged in the crucible of betrayal, refined by the cold fire of calculated justice. Some things, once broken, are never truly put back together. They are simply rebuilt, stronger, colder, and with a far clearer understanding of the foundations they stand upon. If this story resonated with you, please leave a like.